So we're here on Seconds Out with Lou DiBella for the latest edition of DiBella's Digest, which is keeping us all going during lockdown. Thankfully, we need some distraction that's not just eating and piling on weight. How are you doing, Lou?
Oh my God! I mean, talking about eating and piling on weight. I got to start. I got to spend more time on a stationary bike, or I'm going to come out of this looking like a baby elephant. All I do is look forward to my next meal, and but. Hey.
We're all in the same boat, unfortunately. We missed out last week because the news kind of broke just after we did the last digest. The comments made by Devin Haney, which I'm sure you're now well aware of, and subsequent apologies and discussions involving the WBC as well. Just wanted to get your take on all of that.
I mean, it was overblown, Danny. It was overblown. I mean, look, first of all, I don't want to get into conceptual. I prefer race not be injected into anything.
Sure.
Okay. So in a perfect world, that Haney wouldn't have said it. Okay. But no white boy is going to beat me. White people aren't a class of people that are generally disadvantaged by being white.
Sure.
Okay. So, like, it's not like, to be honest, the white people reacting as if this was the equivalent of a white person using the N-word or something. That's absurd. It's absurd. It was an ill-advised statement by a young kid. But racist? I'm not willing to say that. I don't agree with that. And I prefer race not get injected into anything. But the reality, Devin Haney's going to beat the majority of white kids. White boys. He's going to beat the majority of other African-American kids. He's going to beat the majority of fighters. But I didn't view that as, like, I don't think he was consciously attempting to be racist. I didn't view it as some great, horrible, divisive comment. I viewed it as an egoistic, comment made by a young kid inappropriately. And it should be over now. Enough. And, it's funny because boxers can beat the living shit out of women. Boxers can make the most overtly racist comments about black people or Mexican people or people of color. And it flows off our backs like water off a duck. But a black kid makes a comment about, I ain't going to lose to a white boy. And you would think that we were talking about Selma, Alabama in 1965.
Sure.
And that's bullshit. Just pure bullshit. And no offense, but the kind of people that are going out there saying there's no difference between what Devin Haney. Imagine if a white person said that about a black. No, if a white person starts calling a black person a boy, there is a whole difference in terms of history and a culture of prejudice and bias and slavery that's existed in our world for centuries. And if people can't see that, fuck them, because they're stupid.
Yeah, Sonny Edwards, the British boxer, and I were both kind of explaining this to other people on Twitter yesterday, that if you call a black person boy, there's a whole different set of connotations that go with that.
It's completely different. It simply is completely different because black people, particularly in my country, well, it's everywhere. You go around the world, all over the world, black people were treated like chattel. Were treated like property. Okay, that white people have never had that experience. It's just a whole different thing. People that don't understand. Well, what if a black, what if a black person said that? I'm sorry. What if a white person would have said that? It's a completely different thing.
I agree.
So I'm tired of hearing about it. Honestly, it's done. Even the apology. I never should have used that term. Right? Devin felt that he had to make an apology. I think he should have made an apology. Honestly, if I was advising him when he wrote the apology, I would have said, Devin, apologize for just talking about even race. The race doesn't get into the competitiveness of a fight. I shouldn't have said that. But saying white boy is not like, I wouldn't have used that horrible term that offends people. Black guy calls me a white boy, it's not fucking affecting me. It's not the same as an N-word. It's not the same as calling an African-American person a boy. It is not. And people that don't get that, they should look into racial history. They should look into racial sensitivity. They have the problem.
Now, moving on to something that will get you hopefully equally as passionate, but maybe in a more positive way, is the women's boxing generally, but also we've seen this week shots being fired on social media between Terry Harper and Michaela Mayer, which is great to see. They're building up a fight. You've been a long-time advocate of women's boxing. I know you want to put on a female boxing card. We talked about that before. Why do you think it's now is the right time where women's boxing is flourishing, whereas it hasn't always in the past?
Because there are compelling women. The talent pool is better than it's ever been. There are a lot of women who can fight. I mean, Terry Harper can fight. Amanda Serrano can fight. Katie Taylor can fight. Clarissa Shields can fight. I can go through an endless list of women that have great athletic ability, work just as hard as the men, and they can fight. And frankly, their fights with the 2-minute rounds and the shorter length of the fights, they often have more action, from the opening bell to the closing bell than the men's fights do. And the women aren't being overpaid grossly. They're more willing to take on the best competition. I have a lot less problem making matches for my female world champions than I do for the men. It's the right time because they deserve it. They've earned it. They've gotten better. The overall quality of women's boxing is at a much higher level than it used to be. And now, by the way, coming out of this pandemic, how many of us have been literally saved? How many of us, those nurses that are out there, those female healthcare professionals that are out there fighting a war for us against this deadly virus, they're showing more guts, more heart, more fighting spirit than anybody I can think of. And if you want to do an analogy, women are fighters, man. Women are warriors. They're warriors just as great as an extent as men are. And if you make evenly matched quality fights with talented women, they're entertaining. They deserve a forum. They deserve a place. It's not going to replace men's boxing. They're never going to be paid more or equal to men, the same way that I don't expect WNBA players are ever going to be paid similarly to NBA players. Or women's professional soccer players aren't going to make the same as men's Premier League players make. That's not the issue. They deserve to be paid fairly. They deserve to have platforms for their talents. And right now, there is the talent pool. There are the quality of fights that can be made. The women deserve opportunity. And when we get out of this pandemic, they need to get back to work just as quickly as the men do.
What's kind of the ceiling on this? Will we ever see, for example, a women's fight headlining a pay-per-view?
Yes. Are we there right now? No. Do I think it'll be Clarissa Shields and Layla Ali? I think that's no. I don't believe that. I don't think. First of all, I don't think that's that enormous. I think it's more. I also don't think that's traditional boxing. It's pulling someone out of retirement that's been a generation in retirement, over a generation in retirement. In fact, I think yelling about that as the first women's pay-per-view doesn't make sense. But look, if we didn't have a pandemic and things were progressing, could Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano have headlined a smaller pay-per-view? I think it could have. So I think, yes, you will see a pay-per-view headlined by women. I think you will see major televised boxing headlined by women. And they've earned it. They've earned it.
There's something else I want to ask you about before we round off. It's something you said on Twitter earlier today, and I think you echoed the thoughts of a lot of boxing fans out there. BT Sport in the UK, you already know what I'm talking about. They're running this boxing tournament.
Yeah, but I got to tell you something. What were the initial matchups? Because what were the initial matchups and results?
I've only seen it from the round of 16, so I was voting this morning, but I voted the same as presumably you did in the Holmes Joshua fight. And
it's a joke. Larry Holmes would have toyed with AJ, toyed with him. Not even I would have put my house on that fight. There's no way in the world AJ stylistically matched up well, of all people, with Larry Holmes. Tremendous defensive fighter, chin of God, greatest jab in the history of the heavyweight division. I mean, you're talking about. I mean, I'm an AJ fan. I really am. I'm not anti-AJ. I think he's a real top fighter. I think he's an excellent heavyweight. Certainly one of the three best right now. Okay, but when you look at the history of heavyweight boxing,
we've got Toby as well. She's not happy.
Yeah, my dog's. There's another dog walking down the street, so she's a little excited.
I thought maybe she was an AJ fan.
I'm not sure about that one. But you never know. You know, he's an attractive man. She's a, you never know. She's a girl. I don't know. I don't think I don't understand how anybody could know anything about the history of boxing and believe that AJ would beat Larry Holmes. But I got to tell you, I think there was some. I mean, I got to look at the results in the round of 16. What other results did they have so far? Do you know?
No, well, I was voting, and it was still about an hour away from the finish. But I think who was it? There was Vladimir Klitschko against was it George Foreman? Maybe I'd have to have a look. But there were some kind of crazy ones that were hard to visualize as well. But AJ Holmes seemed to be the most clear cut for me, but it was probably the closest in terms of the poll results.
You know, we're all so bored. Everything is being polled. Everything is being top 5 list of this, top 10 list of that, poll of this. You know, it's starting to get really aggravating to me. I don't even want to watch. I'm spending too much time on Twitter. I gotta read more books, read less Twitter, because this shit's starting to infuriate me. You know, and then the worst part is you make a comment and then you get trolled by endless people telling me I don't know anything about boxing. And I don't want to be an asshole, but most of the people commenting, I've forgotten more than they know. So it's a little irritating. Look, credit you got. I got to give you guys across the pond a lot of credit though. You love your fighters.
Yeah.
I mean, when you Brits are fans, you're hardcore fans. You guys are really parochial in the sense of supporting your own. God bless you. Because in America, it's the opposite. It really is. It's not like that here. We don't rally for our own the way you guys do.
I think
someone would have. Yeah.
I think kind of the guys that dip in and out tend to get fervently behind the British heroes, but then I think you got the real hardcore fans who almost go the other way to overcompensate as well.
Could be. They could be, but I don't know. Holmes would have beaten AJ, and I'm really curious to see the other round of 16 results because I'm guessing that something else will strike me as preposterous also.
Well, I just have to take a look at it. Next week's digest will probably be up to around the semi-finals, so we'll see then, won't we?
Yeah. So how are things on your end of the pond? Is it starting to get crazy?
No,
is there any return to?
It's not too bad. I mean, the figures seem to be steadily, very slowly going down now. They're talking about whether the lockdown restrictions will be lifted in the next couple of weeks. So they've extended it to May the 7th at least. And then I guess if the figures continue to go down between now and then, maybe they'll lift some of the restrictions. But it's still risky. We don't want a second spike.
No, look, I think that we got it better safe than sorry. I think we're going to return. We are going to return first with no crowds. I think that's completely obvious. I also think there's going to be an adjustment period because I saw. Did you see the thing that you wanted to talk about? The thing with Devin Haney. Did you see the comment from Bud Crawford that I have to get paid a lot more money if I'm fighting in front of nobody?
Yeah, I saw that yesterday.
That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? There's less revenue, Bud, so we got to pay you more. We got to pay you more, Bud, because less money's coming in,
isn't it? Revenue's less, but costs are higher. This is stupid.
Right. I'm gonna charge you more money to fight when you can't make as much money. See, fighters are going to have to adjust to this new universe the way the rest of us are, and the fighters that are going to get in the ring first and are going to get paid first are the ones that are going to best understand what's going on in the universe right now. Do you know what I'm saying? Like the fighters that are prepared to fight and understand that they're going to have to work within the constraints of what we're facing as a sport right now. those fighters are gonna be more active, and those fighters are going to get the opportunities. Whereas the fighter who says my contract says I make $3 or $4 million, and they're not willing to adjust given the impediments that exist right now to generating revenue for an event, I think those fighters are going to sit longer.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe some fighters have been overpaid for too long, and it's made them complacent as well.
You can make that argument. I think there was going to be an adjustment in boxing anyway. I think we've been in this period of crazy spending with streaming, with particularly in the United States, where there've been these three competing media entities: this PBC, DAZN, USA, and ESPN, and crazy money's been spent. But crazy money was being spent, and it wasn't like the results were better than they've ever been. And it wasn't like the fights have been better than they've ever been. So I think we were heading toward a natural period of adjustment. Now, this pandemic has created the necessity for a worldwide period of adjustment in every industry, in every sport, in every walk of life. So we're in a period of change, and it's going to be interesting to see how we adapt to it. But what I'm doing with my fighters is I'm urging them to stay in physical shape, in cardiovascular shape, and be in a position that when things normalize, they are prepared to fight within 4 weeks or so. So that if opportunities present themselves, they can take them. I'm also going to honestly advise my fighters. If you're offered a fight, you don't have the benefit of sitting there and handpicking your opponents in the new world, because there are way, 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 way more people who need to work in every walk of life, and way, 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 way more fighters who need to work in boxing than ever before. So it's going to be using sound judgment and intellect and a realistic view of what's going on in the world around us to make the decisions with respect to your career. So I'm going to be encouraging my fighters to understand this new world that we're all in.
Brilliant. Well, really appreciate it as always. DiBella's Digest becoming a highlight of my week as well as the viewers. That's great. And well, I don't want the pandemic to end just for that reason, but obviously I do.
Oh, I want it to end, my friends. I want it to end as soon as it possibly can. And greetings from Topolina and myself to everybody.
Yeah, well, she has to be on it every week now. There's no negotiation about that.
She's become my pandemic sidekick, so it's likely.
Brilliant. All right, well, we'll see you next week, and stay safe, of course.
Thank you, my friend. Be well, Danny. Bye-bye.
Take care.